So animal pollination is usually what gets a lot more attention. It's fun to think about. It's got animals that people generally relate to a little bit more than plants. And it's just such a wide variety. So we've got flowers of different color, different size, different shape, animals from all kinds of different parts of the animal tree. Lots of insects. We typically think about insect pollination, but not just bees. Here's a case of a beetle that's being attracted to this flower cluster. Here's a fly that kind of looks like a bee. And here's a hummingbird with a little insect also getting in on the action. And so recruiting a particular pollinator, there's an important signaling system where the flowers, they show a shape, a color, they have a scent. Any of these features are kind of signaling to the animals that this is the kind of flower you're accustomed to seeing. So it's similar to if you're going on a road trip and you see billboards on the side of the road, right? You kind of recognize the ones that offer the kind of food you're interested in, even if you're far from home. So if you go to a different part of the country, you can still recognize a hamburger place, fried chicken place. There's kind of a common signaling to let you know what you're in for. Same thing, these animals will be foraging their environment, looking for flowers that are signaling to them in a way that they recognize, and sometimes even instinctually drawn to. So you want to grab a pollinator that visits your flower reliably, and very importantly, get a pollinator that lines up well with your reproductive structures. So in this flower, this looks like one of those heliconias we saw before with hummingbird pollination. We've got the pollen getting dusted on this animal's head, and there's probably some stigmas here also receiving the pollen. We've got this beetle here. These are a bunch of anthers, and they're hard to see maybe. They're actually anthers wrapped around the style and stigma of these plants. So pollen receipt and pollen delivery kind of in the same place as this beetle sort of bumbles through here. Better case of a plant really lining up this animal. We've got a bilaterally symmetrical flower and this bee fitting in just right. So having a good fit. And then there's a little bit of the, I think, stigma there sticking out of that flower. And so the pollen delivery and pollen receipt probably on the underside of this animal. That's what I would guess at this moment anyway. Lots of different kinds of pollen production, pollen availability. So we have these flowers that are radially symmetrical. Radial symmetry usually goes along with this, what I'm calling an open buffet kind of pollination. So open, flat surface, often perpendicular to the ground. So just like a flat kind of dinner plate location that animals can land on and forage. And as they walk around, they might be coming at this flower from a variety of directions, but the pollen production is so much that they've got to run into pollen somewhere. And then really nicely illustrated here toward the center, these are all stigmas. So as they're poking around on here, they get pollen on them, they brush off pollen that they've already had on them. A little bit less of a specialized pollination system here. If you've got a bilaterally symmetrical flower, that's a good way to restrict the ways that animals visit you. So we've got some here. Bilateral symmetry causes the animals to really approach these flowers from the side, whether they are hovering and sticking a proboscis in or sometimes landing and crawling inside. They're oriented top to bottom to visit these flowers. Other ones, even with their radial symmetry on the right-hand side, these are radially symmetrical, but then have this narrow tube of the petals fused together. So there'd be a nectar reward at the base of that. That's pretty typical. And then some kind of restricted tube that it's hard for most animals to get in for that reward. And selecting for animals that can basically poke their way inside with a long proboscis or a beak or something like that. This is from a study that I've made available to you, looking at a group of related plants and kind of comparing their relative sizes and comparing that against the kinds of animals that visit them. So a variety of bees here, different sizes of bees and different lengths of their probing structures. So some bees, as you can see, have quite long tongues or proboscis. And they are well equipped to grab nectar out of something like this nectar spur here. So the flower has this we call it a nectar spur, just a closed up sac that's kind of pointed at the end. There would be nectar at the base here, but for most of that length, that's too small for the animal to crawl inside. So it's got to kind of get into this area and then stick its tongue out to receive the pollen that's in the bottom of that nectar spur. So this is very good from the animal's perspective, aligns the animal just right, restricts its access, so animals that can't get that nectar probably won't visit this flower, and so it can get more reliable animal visitation. So this was from the study, just sort of exploring the idea that animals are restricted to visiting certain kinds of flowers, or the other way around, certain kinds of flowers are restricted in the animals that visit them. Do the flowers match their pollinators, or other flowers that they're related to better? And it's kind of a mix of both, really, is the takeaway from this one.